I don't have time to do a bit. Besides the one that I thought of earlier, I think I already did before, so I don't want to do it again. No, I don't want to do it. No. 1, 2, 3, 4. Did it, but da 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 da. Stid it, da da ba da dee. Ba da sip ba ba da da. It's stipa papa say. Hi. How's it going? My name is Jimmy. I went to the comic shop today. Picks of the week. Oh no! Take two. Picks of the week. Ba-da-da-da-ba-da. It was pretty easy to decide which picks of the week would be for this week because there's only 3 comic books that came out this week, or at least that I bought. This is the first week that DC Comics is fully not distributing through Diamond distributors, which means for me, I will not have DC Comics readily available to me because the owner of my shop is, as I might have mentioned, particularly vexed with Detective Comics right about now because of their new distributors who apparently mostly consist of Midtown Comics, which is a chain of stores on the East Coast. DC's not even in New York anymore. They're in Los Angeles. Why wouldn't they ask my... I almost called him my boss. Ugh, I used to work at a comic shop. That's the confusion. My point being that also... So there's no DC books. Then Marvel, which is apparently A-okay with my comic shop owner, Marvel is only putting out books every other week. So I think they had a couple trade paperbacks and stuff come out this week. But so that obviously is going to cut way down on my weekly purchases. And if I hadn't picked up this one, I would only have 2 books to talk about. But I did get this All America Comics #1. This is a one-shot from Image Comics, written by Joe Casey and drawn by Dustin Nguyen, who are both very talented fellows indeed. They also were the creative team for Wildcats, although I wouldn't brag about that if I were them. I never read their run of Wildcats. It could be spectacular, but Wildcats in general, even when Alan Moore wrote it, I didn't give a poop. I don't know what this book is about. I'm under the impression that it's almost like a pilot, like they would want to do a regular series, or maybe not. It also seems, this character, without knowing much about it, seems very reminiscent of America Chavez of the Marvel Universe. And I have a feeling, since the last time Joe Casey did a book that I read anyway, was a Batman story, but that wasn't because there was sex in it. It was called Sex. Which is not uncommon. Joe Casey's done it. Frank Miller's done it. Alan Moore's done it. Mark Waid's done it. A lot of very big writers who have these real grandiose ideas for such stodgy old franchises as Superman and Batman. You know, those publishers are still very, DC and Marvel in particular, are very protective of those properties and do not want any, you know, I mean, never mind the fact that DC published a Batman book last year that featured Bruce Wayne's penis. Of course, they also took it off the shelves almost immediately because they're scared of penises, I guess. I can't say as I blame them. So maybe my point is this is Joe Casey's America Chavez story, which would be weird because to my recollection, Joe Casey has not worked for Marvel Comics since America Chavez's creation about 10 or 12 years ago. If even that, it could be 7 or 8 years ago. Well, what do you know about that? I'm babbling. Also, this week, I'm very excited for this. The Goddamned, The Virgin Brides #1. The Goddamned is a book by Jason Aaron and R.M. Wera, who are the creative team for Scalped, which is an incredible comical book that I enjoy quite a bit. I'll buy anything Jason Aaron writes. But so far, I have not bought anything, well, mostly not have bought anything he's written that I was like, oh, that wasn't worth it. But this in particular is a story that takes place during biblical times, and it's a very harsh, realistic... Well, I don't know how realistic it was because I wasn't there. I don't know if that's hard to believe. And it's been a while since this is the second series of The Goddamned. I am hard-pressed to remember what happens in the first one. I remember enjoying it. So, but that was like 7 or 8 years ago. I really don't remember. But it was, it takes place during biblical times, and it's a very bleak, almost hard-boiled. That's what I think it is. It's kind of like a detective story, but set in biblical times, if I remember right. But just the creative team from Scalped alone. If you haven't read Scalped, I also highly recommend that. And then, of course, I'm excited for The Boys, Dear Becky #2. And as I mentioned last month when I read the first issue, the story in this book revolves around Billy Butcher's journal. The framing story takes place in the present day, and wee Huey lives back in Scotland now and has put all this superhero nonsense behind him from when he was in The Boys during the original series. But some mysterious stranger has sent to him his old boss, Billy Butcher's journal, wherein he writes to his dead wife. So they don't make it clear. I mean, it really feels like I don't want to talk too much about the show, and because I don't want to spoil anything, nor do I want to spoil anything for myself somehow. But it feels like this book is staying very much in the comic world and not the TV world, which had been a concern of mine. I still think but I mean, I didn't really want the book to start to reflect. I don't mind when Marvel does that. Marvel does that all the time. Whenever, like, you know, in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, they made it so his webs actually came out of his wrists. So they retconned it in the books to be the same thing until Joe Quesada messed it up for everybody. I don't mind that. I actually kind of like that. I think it kind of makes sense with Marvel and DC properties. But with smaller things like this, I want them to be two separate things. Especially because The Boys is metafictional. The Boys is a superhero comic about superhero comics. So it's nearly impossible to make a TV show about superhero comics that works on that same metafictional level. Oh boy, am I using my degree or what? My point is, I'm excited to read this. I'm frankly just excited to read anything because I did not get as much done. Oh, it's Picks of the Week. Picks of the Week. I did not get as much reading done last week as I had hoped. Picks of last week, but I'm hoping my traditional 4th of July celebrations, sitting around reading comic books all day, that's going to be stretched out over a 3-day period because I'm taking Friday off. I already have Saturday and Sunday off. So I'm just going to be a reading boy. It's not all going to be funny books because I'm also reading a Beatles biography that I'm really into. And I had a new issue of Ugly Things to read, but I also will read comics. First up, and from last week, we had Support Our Shops, SOS. This was really good. This was the good people at Aftershock put this anthology issue one-shot together specifically to give to retailers to sell. So Aftershock is not taking any of the money. I'm assuming none of the creative teams are taking any money either. And like a lot of these sorts of fundraising anthologies, because the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund does one every year, they're not anything you need to have. But it's still fun. And this one in particular, because the CBLDF ones are always the stories in those books are always very censorship heavy, obviously, because they're an anti-censorship organization. But since this is more just about supporting comic shops specifically and publishers and everything else, but mostly the shops, all of the stories were they tended to be very nostalgic. Oh, this was how my comic shop used to be. This is how my comic shop used to be. And it made me very nostalgic for all those sorts of things too, because I don't know, I don't like this getting around, but I love comic books quite a bit, and I love hanging out in comic book stores almost as much. So yeah, it was a fun read. Also, last week I read The Immortal Hulk #34, and just as I had hoped, this was a story featuring not but Samuel Stearns, the leader. Gives us some more insight. It's something that Al Ewing has been doing with this book, as I'm sure I've mentioned a gajillion times before. This book, for the last 34 issues, has been a horror book, essentially. And so Ewing is taking great pains to recharacterize a lot of the Hulk supporting cast, like Thunderbolt Ross and Betty Ross and Rick Jones, and all these characters have gone. There's a couple newer characters, and but mostly it's focusing on, and I mean even on characters like Zemnu, who hasn't really been part of the Hulk supporting cast since the 70s. But Al Ewing does make, and he's got a whole Tumblr based on. Al Ewing's very into the supreme goofiness of the Silver and Bronze Ages, and so he's done a lot to bring that back. This issue, however, was the leader, who has remained a staple Hulk villain, his arch nemesis, I would say. I would say even more so than Thunderbolt Ross, but we could argue that, right? Doesn't that sound like something you'd like to do? But so it all ties back in, and a lot of this storyline, the underlying subtext or the underlying sort of villain to all of it is Brian Banner, Bruce Banner's father. So the leader ties in nicely at this point with here. And so, yeah, it was a really fun. And it was just, this issue was almost like a one shot. If you like the Hulk and you haven't read the Hulk in a while, this would be a fun issue to pick up. Because he basically retells the leader's history from his creation to all the times he's lost to the Hulk. And it was really cool. If you don't remember those old stories, it's still fun, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. And then finally, I read That Texas Blood from Image Comics. This is the book. I think this cover might actually be by Sean Phillips, but the interior is drawn by his son, Jacob Phillips, and written by Chris Condon, who I think this is the first comic book he's written. It's certainly the first comic book of his that I've read. And Jacob Phillips is chip off the old block. Really, really good at drawing. And it's a very good... I can't really tell you a whole lot without giving it away, but it's a very good Texas noir story. Texas noir stories are some of the finest in American noir. You can point to the works of Jim Thompson completely, but there's a lot of, and Cormac McCarthy, I guess, and Joe R. Lansdale. I'm thinking of all these Texan authors now. But yeah, since Jim Thompson especially, I think really, Jim Thompson was the writer who really put Texas on the map as far as crime fiction goes. And so this comic book is definitely in that vein of The Killer Inside Me, Population 1280, except the sheriff in this is the hero and not very much the villain as he is in those other novels. But yeah, it's really good. I'm really stoked. I hope the world can put off ending for another couple months until I can get this. I mean, I'm hoping Previews have to shut down distribution again. I'm going to have to go back to buying trades every week like an animal. Anyway, that's picks of last week. I think that's it. I did get actually a big. I ordered a few books from Lone Star, my favorite online comic book store, mycomicshop.com. So those it was like 3 weeks ago. They finally came yesterday, and then I have actually another smaller order from them coming in Friday. So I'm gonna have a lot to read. So maybe I'll show that off to you next week. But I figure I'll give you a break at 12.5 minutes now. So that's it. I don't want to do... It's over with anyway. 2, 3, 4. Ba-da-dee-ba-da-ba-doo. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. I'm sorry I yelled.